So you bought a drone and you don't know where to fly it? Whether it's federal law or state law, I got you covered. Hello and welcome to LegalDrone, where we talk about drones and other tech stuff. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. So before we begin, I just want to make one little disclaimer. Everything I say here is for educational purposes only. Nothing that I say here should be considered as legal advice. If you need legal advice, please speak to your lawyer. So if you're in the United States and you have a drone, you will be quite regulated. You either have federal law or state law. And yes, there's a misconception that states cannot regulate drones, but that's not true. States can regulate drones, and we're gonna see how. Let's jump right into federal law. So Congress is the entity that approves law and then are signed by the president. So drones are flying over the United States airspace, and therefore the United States Congress has jurisdiction to regulate drones. So, and that is why you have seen the FAA publishing guidelines, because Congress handed the FAA the jurisdiction to regulate drones, specifically in things about airspace, where you can operate a drone, whether it's close to an airport or not, and how high you can fly it. All that stuff is controlled and is regulated by the FAA. But there are also other laws that applies to drones, and these are federal laws that applies to you when you're operating a drone. So if you want to know more about the FAA and how the FAA is regulating drones, please be sure to subscribe, because I'm gonna be adding videos about these regulations. So we move on to the second type of federal law that applies to drones, and that is the U.S. Wildlife Refuges. So we have the United States Wildlife Refuges, and there's a federal law that says that you cannot fly a drone over those places. So the United States Fish and Wildlife Service are the ones that are gonna be regulating that part of the law. So the United States Fish and Wildlife Service is the government entity that is responsible to oversee that kind of law. So you can be called sometime by a United States Fish and Wildlife Service employee because you uploaded a video to YouTube in a wildlife refuge, and you can be fined by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service for illegal drone flying. Next, we move on to the United States Park Services. So this is a part of the regulations that is really controversial, because there are a lot of people that say that the United States Park Services don't have jurisdiction to regulate drones, but they issued a memorandum a few years back telling people that they cannot fly drones in national parks. And in the way that they crafted that, it was really clever. You could not take off or land your aircraft from United States National Parks ground, or you cannot operate that drone within the United States National Parks ground. And by that, I say that they were really clever. Of course, I think they had someone that helped them craft it that way, because in that way, you are not overlaying with the FAA jurisdiction of controlling airspace. So because you are only regulating where a person can stand or where a person can put on their drone before they enter an airspace. And the last thing I want to talk about regulations at the federal level is flying over or close to critical infrastructure. You all know that in the whole United States there are a lot of places that are considered critical infrastructure to the national security. So close or over that particular infrastructure is prohibited to fly. And you have to be very careful, because sometimes these infrastructures does not appear in most of the apps that you download for flying your drone to check on if you are able to fly a drone, because most of these apps only contain what the FAA says. They are synced to what the FAA is saying about where you can or cannot fly and how high you can fly your drone. So you have to be very careful. I'm gonna put a link in the description for all the places that are considered critical infrastructure in the United States where you cannot fly your drone. And these places include dams, include buildings, sometimes railroad tracks, highways, all those infrastructures that are considered critical for the national security. You cannot fly over them. We now move on to local laws. Local governments, whether it's state, local, municipal governments, they can regulate drone flying. They can do it, and the FAA has issued what most people call the preemption memorandum. It's not exactly a memorandum, it's basically a checklist for local governments to use when they are planning to enact law. It says that sometimes you have to consult with the FAA to, enact some law. Sometimes you don't have to do that, and it's gonna depend on what the regulation is gonna be. For example, if a state government is regulating how local enforcement are going to fly a drone, where they can fly it, how they can fly it, for what they can fly it, that particular law doesn't have to go through a consultation with the FAA. Local governments can regulate things like voyeurism. So voyeurism is something that you are doing with your drone that doesn't really involve controlling airspace. So you can say that someone cannot fly a drone within some distance of a property's window, for example, because that is gonna be considered voyeurism. So local governments can do and can craft law like that in order to regulate drones furthermore. Also, what apply to the national parks about regulating where you can take off land or operate your drone, that also can apply to local governments. So local governments can say, well, if you are on an emergency stop, you cannot fly a drone. So they can add that to the law. You shouldn't be using the emergency stop for that, but they can put up a fine and define that as a violation to the law. And local governments can put up fines up to whatever they want, and you can be and someday you can be driving and you say, oh, that view is really beautiful, I'm gonna stop here, and you can get a fine for $5,000, and you're gonna get mad. You're gonna say, well, this is the FAA. Well, not exactly, because what they are regulating is something about policy power from states for the safety in the highways, and they can say, well, you cannot, or the safety, or they are regulating the safety on the roads, and that's something that they don't have to consult with the FAA for enacting into law, and they can regulate that stuff. So another thing that local governments can do is that they can regulate whether you can operate a small unmanned aircraft or a drone from a residential area. So if you are at your house and you live in a residential area, you have to check with local governments, as I defined it previously, to see if you need to get a permission or if you can fly at all, and you have to do that. So what I recommend is that before you fly, you always do a checklist of the laws that apply. So if you don't know if a law applies at a particular place, you have to check with your local government, and that should be part of your pre-flight preparation, whether you are flying recreational, whether you're flying as a commercial pilot. you should have, and it's a really good practice to have this law framework checklist to see if you can fly your drone legally where you want to fly it. In the end, what I want you to get from this video is that there are many places in the United States that are currently regulating drones, whether it's at the state level, whether it's at a municipal level, city level, and obviously federal level is regulating drones, so you have to be aware of that before you go to fly somewhere and then get fined for flying, because the FAA is really on the education and compliance business, so they want pilots to be compliant with the law. So when they contact you, you might be getting an educational call from the FAA. But when you're on the street and a police approaches you and you are violating the law, you might be get a citation, you might be get fined, because sometimes these laws have been around for a few years, and that education phase from the local government has already passed, and new drone pilots don't know the law. They go to a park, they go to a state park, they go to fly, and they get a $5,000 fine, and then they get crazy. Oh, I got fined for flying my drone, and I got arrested for flying my drone. So you have to be very aware of the local laws that apply. That is the most important thing right here, because everybody should know the federal law. Federal law applies to everyone and everywhere. But if you're flying in some state, there might be some laws that apply, and if you're flying in another state, there might be other laws that apply, and you have to be aware which laws apply. So that's all for the video today. If you like the content and if you want more, please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you get notified when I upload new videos like this or anything about drone stuff and tech stuff. Also hit that like button, and see you next time.